Every morning at exactly 7:40 a.m., Evelyn Carter sat on the same cold metal bench near the corner of Maple and 3rd. The bus stop had no shelter anymore, just a faded sign, a cracked sidewalk, and the steady hum of a town that was always in a hurry. People passed her every day, close enough to brush past her coat, yet somehow miles away. Evelyn was 72 years old, though no one ever asked. Her hair, once a deep chestnut brown, had surrendered quietly to silver. She wore the same soft beige coat each winter, not because she loved it, but because it still fit and still kept the wind from finding her bones. Her hands rested neatly in her lap, folded like someone who had learned long ago not to take up too much space. Commuters glanced at their phones. Teenagers laughed into their earbuds. A young mother rushed by, coffee in one hand, a toddler's mitten slipping from the other. Evelyn watched them all with calm, tired eyes. She wasn't waiting for the bus. Not really. She hadn't taken it in years. She sat there because the bench felt less lonely than her house, and because movement around her made the silence easier to bear. To most people, she was just another elderly woman. Someone's grandmother. Someone else's responsibility. Easy to ignore. Easy to walk past. What no one saw was how carefully Evelyn listened to footsteps. How she noticed who hurried and who hesitated. How she studied faces, not out of curiosity but habit. When you've spent a lifetime being overlooked, you learn to observe instead. She remembered a time when she had been seen. When her name had been spoken with warmth. When someone had waited for her. That time felt distant now, like a photograph left too long in the sun. Edges faded, colors soft, details unclear. The town around her had changed. New cafes had replaced old diners. The bookstore she once loved was now a gym with glass walls and loud music. Even the bench had been repainted twice since she first sat there years ago. But Evelyn remained the same. Quiet, present, and unnoticed. A man in a suit stepped over a crack in the pavement to avoid her feet. A woman slowed for half a second, then kept walking. No one asked if she was cold. No one asked why she came every day. No one asked her anything at all. And Evelyn had grown used to that. She wasn't bitter. Bitterness required energy. What she carried instead was something heavier and softer. Resignation. The understanding that in a world that worshipped youth and speed, there was little room for stillness and age. As the bus roared past without stopping, wind tugged at her coat, and Evelyn adjusted it with practiced calm. She looked straight ahead, eyes steady, heart quiet. She didn't know it yet, but this morning, this ordinary, invisible morning, was the last day she would sit on that bench as a woman no one truly saw. Because soon someone would stop, and everything would begin to change. Evelyn learned to be strong long before she ever understood what the word meant. Strength in her world was not loud or triumphant. Didn't look like victory. It looked like silence. It looked like swallowing words before they reached the tongue and smiling when there was nothing to smile about. She was 19 when she first learned this lesson. Her mother stood in the doorway of their small kitchen. Hands dusted with flour, eyes tired but firm. "You'll be fine," she said. "You always are." Those words followed Evelyn for decades. She married young, not out of passion but practicality. Henry was steady, reliable, and kind in a distant way. He worked long hours and came home exhausted, believing love was proven by providing, not by presence. Evelyn told herself that was enough, that wanting more was selfish, that other women had it worse. So she became good at adjusting, good at shrinking expectations, good at being low maintenance. When Henry forgot anniversaries, she reminded herself he never forgot to pay the bills. When conversations stayed shallow, she filled the silence with chores. When loneliness crept in at night, she turned toward the wall and waited for sleep. Friends used to call her strong. "You handle everything so well," they said. "You never complain," they admired. Evelyn smiled every time. She raised children with quiet devotion, attending school events alone when Henry worked late, cheering softly from the sidelines. She never missed a meal, a permission slip, or a bedtime story. Yet even then, she learned that being needed was not the same as being known. When the children grew and moved away, they called less, not out of cruelty but busyness. Evelyn reassured them each time. "I'm fine," she said. "Don't worry about me." And she meant it, at least she thought she did. Strength became her armor. It protected her from disappointment, but it also kept her distant from joy. She didn't ask for help when the house felt too quiet. She didn't admit when the days blurred together. She didn't say out loud that sometimes, being strong felt like being erased. Years passed like this, smooth, unremarkable, heavy. Henry aged into routine, and Evelyn aged into invisibility. They existed side by side, sharing a life without truly sharing themselves. On the outside, Evelyn looked like a woman who had everything under control. Inside, she was a collection of moments she never allowed herself to feel fully. She had dreams once, small ones. Learning to paint. Traveling somewhere warm. Sitting across from someone who asked her questions and waited for real answers. But strength told her those things were unnecessary, impractical, indulgent. So she folded those dreams away, like letters never sent. Now, at 72, people still called her strong. They said it with admiration, not realizing the cost. They didn't see that strength, when worn too long, can become a quiet prison. Evelyn carried that strength with her to the bus stop every morning, sitting upright, composed, undemanding. She didn't know yet that the life she spent being strong had also prepared her for the moment when she would finally allow herself to be honest. For the first time in decades, strength was about to mean something entirely different. The day Evelyn's house went quiet did not arrive with drama or warning. There were no raised voices, no slammed doors, no final arguments that might later be replayed in memory. It came softly, like dust settling after a long afternoon, almost polite in the way it took everything with it. Henry died on a Tuesday. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and something metallic. Machines beeped with indifferent rhythm, as if marking time for someone else's life. Evelyn sat beside him, her coat folded neatly on her lap, hands resting where they always did. Still, controlled, prepared. When the nurse gently said his name, and then said it again, Evelyn already knew. She nodded. She always nodded. The drive home felt unreal, as though the streets had rearranged themselves. The house greeted her the same way it always had, with silence. But this silence was different. It was deeper, permanent. She set her purse down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a long time, unsure what came next. That night, she slept on her side of the bed. Not because it mattered, but because habit is powerful when grief has no language. In the days that followed, neighbors brought casseroles and quiet sympathy. People hugged her longer than usual, then slowly returned to their lives. Cards arrived. Flowers wilted. Eventually the phone stopped ringing. Evelyn never cried the way people expected her to. Tears felt unnecessary, almost indulgent. She had spent decades preparing for loss without knowing it. Strength had taught her how to keep breathing when something essential disappeared. But grief has a way of revealing itself in small, unexpected moments. She reached for 2 mugs instead of 1. She turned toward the sound of a television that wasn't on. She caught herself listening for footsteps that would never come. The house, once merely quiet, became vast. Every room echoed. The refrigerator hummed too loudly. The clock in the hallway suddenly felt aggressive in its honesty. Nights were the hardest. Without conversation to anchor the hours, time stretched. Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling, noticing cracks she had never paid attention to before. She wondered how long they'd been there. She wondered how long she had been disappearing without noticing. After the funeral, something else vanished: purpose. No one needed her in the same way anymore. The children checked in, kind but distant. "Let us know if you need anything," they said. Evelyn thanked them and meant it when she said she was fine. So she created routines. Routine was safety. Morning tea. Folding laundry that wasn't dirty. Sitting at the kitchen table long after breakfast, just to hear the sound of a chair moving. Eventually, she began leaving the house more often, not to go anywhere specific, but to avoid the weight of stillness. That was how she found the bench at Maple and Third. A place where silence felt shared, where life moved around her, even if it didn't include her. The house remained quiet. But what Evelyn didn't realize was that the silence she feared was also making space. Space for truths she had never allowed herself to hear, and for a voice she had ignored for far too long. The quiet had taken much from her. Soon it would give something back. There were words Evelyn had carried for so long that they no longer felt like words at all. They were weight. They lived in her chest, pressing gently but constantly, shaping the way she breathed and the way she moved through the world. She had learned early that some thoughts were safer kept inside, where they could do less harm. Growing up, she had watched her mother swallow disappointment with practiced grace. Complaints were considered ungrateful. Desire was something to be managed, not expressed. So Evelyn learned the same lesson. Keep the peace, even if it costs you your voice. Through her marriage, there were sentences she rehearsed silently but never spoke. I feel lonely even when you're here. I wish you would ask me how my day was. I need more than this. Each time the moment came, she told herself it wasn't the right time. Henry looked tired. Work had been hard. Tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow always felt safer than today. When the children were young, she held back a different kind of truth. She loved them fiercely, but sometimes she felt invisible even in motherhood, defined by what she provided, not by who she was. She never said how exhausted she felt. Never admitted how much she missed the woman she had been before responsibility filled every corner of her life. After Henry died, the silence became more honest and more dangerous. Without anyone else's needs to attend to, the unspoken thoughts grew louder. They surfaced while she washed dishes, while she folded clothes that no longer belonged to anyone, while she lay awake at night listening to her own breath. She wondered what might have happened if she had spoken sooner. If she had demanded tenderness instead of settling for stability. If she had chosen herself, even once, without apology. But regret, she learned, is not always sharp. Often, it is dull and constant, like a low ache you forget is there until something brushes against it. At the bus stop, Evelyn sometimes practiced saying the words she never had. Not out loud, just enough to feel them exist. I wanted more. I was scared. I didn't know how to ask. She watched couples argue and then laugh minutes later. She saw young women speak boldly, unafraid of being labeled difficult. A quiet envy settled in her chest. Not bitterness but mourning. Not for youth itself but for permission. The hardest truth was the simplest one. No one had silenced her as much as she had silenced herself. Evelyn had believed that being agreeable made her lovable, that endurance earned affection. Instead, it taught people how little she required. There were dreams she never confessed, even to herself. To learn to paint without worrying if it was good. To sit across from someone who listened without checking the time. To be asked, not assumed. As she sat on the bench each morning, these unspoken truths sat beside her like invisible companions. They did not demand attention. They waited. Evelyn didn't yet know who she would say these things to, or if she ever would. But for the first time she stopped pushing them away. Acknowledging them felt dangerous. It also felt alive. And somewhere deep within her, beneath decades of quiet obedience, a voice stirred, soft, uncertain, but unmistakably her own, waiting for the moment it would finally be heard. The stranger arrived without announcement, the way most meaningful things do. Evelyn noticed him before he sat down, not because he was loud, but because he hesitated. People usually passed the bench with practiced indifference, their steps quick, their eyes fixed ahead. This man slowed, glanced at the bus schedule taped crookedly to the pole, then looked at the empty space beside her as if weighing a decision. He was young, late 20s, maybe early 30s. His jacket was too thin for the morning chill, and the dark circles under his eyes suggested a kind of tiredness sleep couldn't fix. When he finally sat, he left a careful distance between them, respectful, uncertain. The bench creaked softly under his weight. They did not speak. For several minutes, The only sounds were traffic and the wind threading through bare branches. Evelyn stared ahead, pretending not to notice him, though her awareness had sharpened. She had always been good at sensing emotional weather. He checked his phone, put it away, checked it again, sighed. Evelyn wondered what kind of life made a young man look so worn. She imagined him rushing somewhere important, late already, carrying worries that didn't fit neatly into his pockets. She had known that feeling once, when time felt urgent and mistakes felt permanent. The bus came and went. He didn't board it. That surprised her. He rubbed his hands together for warmth, then spoke without turning toward her. "Cold mornings are the worst," he said, as if testing the weight of his own voice. Evelyn nodded. "They are," she replied. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Silence returned, but it had shifted. It was no longer empty. It was shared. Over the next few mornings, the young man appeared again. Same hesitation. Same seat. Some days they exchanged a sentence or two. Other days nothing at all. There was comfort in that. No expectations, no explanations required. Evelyn learned small things about him the way you learn about the weather. He worked nearby but didn't seem to enjoy it. He drank his coffee too fast. He smiled politely but rarely with his eyes. What he learned about her was harder to tell. She didn't offer details. Years of restraint had made her cautious. But she noticed that when he spoke, he listened to her responses as if they mattered. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush her words. That alone felt unfamiliar. One morning he arrived later than usual, breath uneven, eyes heavy. He sat down and stared at the pavement for a long moment. Evelyn sensed something in him that mirrored something in herself, a quiet unraveling hidden beneath routine. "You ever feel like you're exactly where you're supposed to be," he said slowly, "and still completely lost?" The question surprised her. No one asked her things like that anymore. "Yes," she said after a pause. "I do." He looked at her then. Not quickly, not out of obligation, but truly looked. As if registering her for the first time. Not just her age or her coat or her stillness, but her presence. Evelyn felt something shift inside her chest. A small click like a door unlocking. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know why he kept missing the bus. She didn't know what brought him to that bench day after day. But she knew this much. For the first time in a long while, she was no longer sitting alone. And that quiet companionship was already changing something neither of them had words for, yet. It happened on a morning that looked no different from the others. The sky was pale and undecided, caught somewhere between rain and light. Evelyn sat as she always did, her hands folded neatly, her coat buttoned to the collar. The young man arrived later than usual, his steps slower. His shoulders drawn inward as if he were carrying something heavy he couldn't set down. They sat in silence longer than usual that day. Cars passed. Cyclists rode by. The bus stop sign rattled faintly in the wind. Time moved forward, but something about the air felt suspended, like a held breath. The young man exhaled sharply and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Evelyn nodded, though a quiet alertness rose within her. Questions had not been part of her life for a long time, especially questions directed at her. He hesitated, searching for the right words, then finally spoke. "When was the last time someone asked what you wanted?" The question landed softly, but it echoed. Evelyn did not answer right away. Her mind reached instinctively for politeness, for a safe response. "I'm fine. I don't need much." But the question had bypassed those defenses. It wasn't asking about comfort or convenience. It was asking about desire. Time seemed to slow around her. The noise of the street dulled. The bench beneath her felt suddenly solid, real. Her chest tightened, not with panic but recognition. She searched her memory. She thought of her marriage, of conversations that revolved around schedules and responsibilities. She thought of motherhood, of being needed rather than known. She thought of the years after Henry's death, when concern came in the form of instructions, not curiosity. No one had asked her that question. Not recently. Not honestly. Maybe not ever. "I don't know," she said at last. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't tremble. "I don't think anyone ever has." The young man nodded, as if he had expected that answer. He didn't rush to fill the silence. He didn't try to fix anything. He simply let the truth exist between them. "That's not fair," he said softly. The word fair caught her off guard. Evelyn had never framed her life in terms of fairness. She had accepted things as they were, believing endurance was a virtue. But his simple statement cracked something open. She felt a warmth behind her eyes. Not tears exactly, but pressure. Years of unspoken truth pressed against a door that had been shut too long. "I didn't think it mattered," she admitted. Saying it out loud felt dangerous. Also freeing. "What I wanted, I mean." He turned toward her fully now. "It does," he said. "It always does." Evelyn let his words settle. She realized then that this wasn't just a conversation. It was an invitation, one she had been waiting for without knowing it. The bus arrived, hissing to a stop. People boarded. Neither of them moved. For the first time in decades, Evelyn considered her own answer. Not the polite one, not the practical one, but the honest one. She didn't know what she wanted yet. But she knew she wanted to find out. And in that moment, sitting on a weathered bench beside a stranger who had dared to ask, time resumed its pace. But Evelyn's life had quietly, irrevocably shifted onto a different path. Evelyn spoke before fear could stop her. "I spent my life being needed," she said softly, "but never truly known." The words surprised her with their honesty. For the first time, her silence felt heavier than her truth. Regret, Evelyn realized, was not the loud, dramatic thing she had always imagined. It did not arrive in waves of panic or tear-soaked nights. It lived quietly, tucked into ordinary moments, revealing itself only when something finally asked to be felt. She had spent years believing regret meant missed opportunities. Paths not taken, chances lost forever. But sitting on the bench beside the young man, she understood something deeper. Regret was not about what life denied her. It was about what she denied herself. "I thought regret would feel bigger," she said slowly, choosing each word with care. "Like a mistake you can point to. A wrong turn." He listened, his gaze steady, patient. "But it's not like that," she continued. "It's smaller, quieter. It's all the times I didn't speak because I didn't want to cause trouble. All the times I said it's fine when it wasn't." She paused, surprised by how easily the words were coming now. They had waited a long time to be spoken. Evelyn thought of the years she had measured her worth by usefulness. If she was helpful, dependable, easy, then she believed she deserved her place in the world. Wanting more felt dangerous, like asking for something she hadn't earned. "I didn't think I was allowed to want things," she admitted. The young man nodded, as if her confession mirrored his own unspoken thoughts. "I think a lot of people feel that way," he said. "They just don't realize it until later." Later. The word carried weight. Evelyn had once believed later was a promise. Now she understood it could also be a warning. She remembered moments that had seemed insignificant at the time. A conversation she avoided, a dream she postponed, a boundary she never set. None of them felt like failure when they happened. But together, they formed a life shaped by caution instead of truth. "That's what regret really is," she said. "It's not the big mistakes. It's the slow habit of choosing comfort over honesty." She expected sadness to follow that realization. Instead, she felt something else, clarity. Regret, she saw now, was not a punishment. It was information. It showed her where she had abandoned herself, where fear had made decisions on her behalf. And information, unlike time, could still be used. She looked at the young man. "You're young," she said gently. "But I can see it in you. You're already tired of pretending." He smiled faintly. "I didn't know you could see that." "I've had a lot of practice," she replied. For a moment neither spoke. The street hummed around them, life continuing at its usual pace. But inside Evelyn, something had shifted from mourning to understanding. She realized then that regret did not mean life was over. It meant there was still something left that mattered enough to ache. And perhaps the greatest regret of all would be recognizing the truth and doing nothing with it. Evelyn straightened slightly on the bench. The weight she had carried for decades felt different now. Still heavy but no longer shapeless. She finally knew what regret was trying to tell her. It wasn't asking her to relive the past. It was asking her to choose herself now. For most of her life, Evelyn had believed time was something that only moved forward, never forgiving, never slowing. Each year felt like a door closing behind her, sealing off versions of herself she could no longer reach. She had told herself that certain things belonged to the young. Dreams, reinvention, boldness. At 72, she thought her only job was to accept what remained. But that morning, sitting on the familiar bench at Maple and Third, something inside her resisted that old belief. "It's probably too late for me," she said quietly, more out of habit than conviction. The young man turned toward her, his expression gentle but firm. "Late for what?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to answer, and found she couldn't. The truth was, she didn't know anymore. Too late to speak honestly. Too late to want something different. Too late to matter. She realized then that she had been repeating the phrase "too late" for so long that she had never stopped to question it. Evelyn watched a woman jog past the bench, earbuds in, hair pulled back, focused and determined. She watched an older couple walk hand in hand, moving slowly but deliberately, as if they had learned how precious each step was. Life did not appear to be finished with anyone. "It's strange," Evelyn said. "I spent years thinking I had missed my chance. But maybe I just never gave myself one." The idea settled into her like a quiet truth. That afternoon, Evelyn did something small but entirely new. Instead of returning home and sitting in the silence of her house, she walked one extra block past her street. Just one. There was no grand plan, no dramatic intention. She simply kept going. She passed a community center she had driven by for years without noticing. A handwritten sign in the window caught her eye. "Beginner painting class. All ages welcome." All ages. She stood there longer than she meant to, heart beating faster than it had any right to. Painting had been a dream she buried decades ago, dismissed as impractical and unnecessary. She imagined herself inside, hands unsteady, surrounded by strangers. Fear whispered that she would look foolish. Another voice, quieter, newer, asked a different question. "What if you don't?" Evelyn walked inside. The room smelled faintly of paint and coffee. A woman smiled at her without surprise, without judgment. "First time?" she asked. Evelyn nodded. "Yes," she said. The word felt bold. Honest. That evening, she returned home with paint under her fingernails and a strange warmth in her chest. The house was still quiet, but it no longer felt empty. It felt like a place waiting to be lived in again. Over the next weeks, Evelyn made small, deliberate choices. She spoke more honestly with her children, not with accusation but with truth. She told them when she missed them. She told them when she felt lonely. To her surprise, they listened. She returned to the bench each morning, but she no longer sat as someone waiting for time to pass. She sat as someone who had reclaimed it. One morning, the young man didn't arrive. She felt a flicker of disappointment, but not fear. He had given her something far more lasting than companionship. He had reminded her she still belonged to her own life. Evelyn finally understood what she had been wrong about for so long. It wasn't too late. Never was. The only thing that had ever stood between her and a fuller life was permission. And at last, she had given it to herself. Evelyn never became famous. She didn't write a book, give a speech, or appear in anyone's headline. Her life did not transform in ways that would impress strangers. And yet, something far more important happened. Something quieter, deeper, and truer. She began to live out loud. Not loudly in volume, but in honesty. The bench at Maple and Third remained part of her mornings, But it was no longer a place of waiting. It became a place of remembering. Remembering who she had been. Remembering who she still was. Some days she sat for only a few minutes before continuing on to class or the library. Other days she lingered, watching people pass with a gentler understanding. She noticed how many of them carried the same weight she once had. People rushing. People enduring. People surviving instead of speaking. She saw young women apologizing for taking space. Middle-aged men swallowing disappointment behind forced smiles. Elderly faces mirroring the quiet resignation she had worn for decades. And she understood then that her story was never just hers. It belonged to all the moments we stay silent when our truth is asking to be heard. Evelyn's silence had taught her something powerful, not because it was right, but because of what it cost her. It taught her that being strong is not the same as being whole. That endurance without honesty slowly erases the self. That love cannot grow where truth is never invited. She had believed her silence protected others. In reality, it had only isolated her. One afternoon, while cleaning out an old drawer, Evelyn found a stack of letters she had written but never sent, thoughts meant for no one in particular. She read them slowly without judgment. Instead of grief, she felt compassion. For the woman who wrote them. For the fear that shaped them. For the courage it took to finally stop hiding. She didn't blame herself anymore. That, perhaps, was the greatest lesson of all. Evelyn learned that regret does not demand punishment. It asks for attention. That healing does not begin when life becomes easier, but when honesty becomes braver than fear. And that silence, once broken, loses its power. She began practicing small acts of truth. Saying no without explanation. Saying yes without guilt. Saying I need without shame. Each one felt unfamiliar but none felt wrong. When her children noticed the change, they didn't resist it. They adapted. They leaned in. They met her where she finally stood. And when strangers spoke to her, at the painting class, at the cafe, on the sidewalk, Evelyn met their eyes. She didn't rush past connection anymore. She allowed herself to be seen. The young man never returned to the bench. But Evelyn often thought of him, not with longing but gratitude. Some people enter your life not to stay, but to awaken something you had forgotten how to recognize. He had asked one question. She had answered it for the rest of her life. If Evelyn's silence could speak now, it would not warn us about aging or time. It would tell us something simpler and more urgent. Do not wait to be asked. Do not assume your needs are obvious or unimportant or inconvenient. Do not trade your voice for approval. The world does not reward quiet suffering. It simply moves past it. Your truth deserves air. Evelyn understood now that life does not end when youth fades. It ends when we stop choosing ourselves out of fear of disruption. And as long as there is breath, there is choice. On her 73rd birthday, Evelyn painted a small canvas. Nothing remarkable, just light breaking through clouds. She hung it in her living room, where she could see it every morning. It reminded her of who she had been, and who she had finally allowed herself to become. Her silence had taught her many lessons. But her voice, soft, late, and finally free, taught her the most important one of all. It is never wrong to want more truth in your life. And it is never too late to begin speaking it.